Okay, let's talk about this guy. Okay, the father is the bigger guy on the top. That's Kim Jong-il. His son Kim Jong-un is the one that's running the country right now. The picture shows one of his intermediate-range ballistic missiles that are the solid fuel and launched from vehicles. Okay, next slide, please. This is what I wanted to cover today, and this is what we're doing on a public outreach. We've done this to many organizations throughout the state, and what we wanted to just cover is just give you an idea, update on what's happening now, what we are doing with the state and the counties, and what you should be doing for your personal protection or resilience. Okay, next slide. About a month ago, I think this was I can't see it. October of this year, the Star Advertiser did a poll, not commissioned by us. It was it's not scientific, but the questions was asked, what do you think of the state's efforts to prepare Hawaii residents for the possibility of a nuclear attack? And the options were, it's necessary regardless of the possibility of the attack. And then it's not necessary because with such an attack, preparation won't matter. It is not necessary, the possibility is too low, and it's necessary because the possibility is high. When you aggregate it's necessary and it's not necessary, it's like 51% say the planning preparedness is necessary, and 49% says not necessary. Okay, next slide. Now, I just want to cover some misconceptions that I've seen over the last few months when we were doing this outreach program. The first one is we shouldn't plan or prepare because it will never happen. Okay, our theme is that it is unlikely, but we cannot ignore it. It's interesting. The last week of November, just before the siren test last Friday, as we were preparing for the press conference, he launched another missile. This was about an hour before the press conference. So he launched another missile, the longest range missile that he's ever launched. So again, it's in our face. We can't ignore it. So our premise is that because it's there, we cannot ignore it and act like it's not going to happen. It's there. We have to address it. The second misconception is that we shouldn't plan or prepare because we're all going to die. If it's a nuclear attack, there's no survival. We might as well just give it all up, and we're going to die. So stop preparing. But again, if as we go through the models, the damage assessments, what happens if it hits, and I'll show you some of the assumptions that we've made based on scientific input, there's going to be thousands and thousands and thousands of survivors. And I don't want to be the guy standing there next to the governor say, we stopped preparing to take care of you guys because you guys were all supposed to die. Okay, that's how silly it is. I mean, Americans, the Hawaii people, we don't just give up. We're going to recover and we're going to sustain ourselves, and we will continue on after this disaster. We don't give up. So when I hear this, it kind of disappoints me because we have to prepare because we have to take care of all the survivors, the casualties, and get back in shape again and recover. Okay, those are my 2 bits as far as my soapbox today. Next slide. Okay, why do we say it's unlikely? I've been asked this so many times. Why is it unlikely? Number one, his main goal, Kim Jong-un's main goal, is for regime survival. If he does this, if he pushes the button, attacks any of us, our allies, he's doomed. The retaliation will be swift, complete. We talk about MAD, M-A-D, mutual assured destruction. In this case, the destruction is Korea, not the United States. So keep that in mind. Some people think that he's not a lunatic. He knows what he's doing, and he's been playing us for a long time, so he's not a lunatic. But the point is, he does not want to do regime suicide, and that's what would happen. The other point is that we have ABM, anti-ballistic missile defense. Is it 100%? I can't answer that. But we have that defense system in place, and every time he launches, we learn more and more and more from his events and what we can do to stop it. The other one is more blunt. He has a limited amount of missiles, limited amount of warheads. He has a lot of close-range targets that he can guarantee to hit, like South Korea, Japan, not a remote bunch of islands in the middle of the Pacific. Even Guam. Guam would be a target difficult. The other one is warhead reentry dynamics. Open source information over the last missile test showed that this nose cone disintegrated upon entry. There was also talk about it was a liquid fuel missile, which is easier to detect as far as the preparation as opposed to a solid fuel missile, and on and on and on. The warhead reentry dynamics, again, that's what I talked about, the warhead reentry. And then targeting. We have no idea. He has not demonstrated any capability as far as accurate targeting. And that's why when we prepare for the state, the education and the material that we're putting out is statewide because we cannot assess where he would hit. He could miss and hit somebody else. That's why we're going statewide on this. Okay, next slide. Now this is just a comparison of the current situation. On the left side is the Cold War time period, Soviet Union. We had a federally funded Civil Defense Act or legislation going through. It would take days and weeks to prepare, and the reason we say that is that between Russia and the United States, the Soviet Union and the United States, there will be festering conflicts within the European area. In the military, we trained for this invasion through the Fulda Gap by the Russians to Germany. All this type of ramping up will be taking place, giving us time to get to the point where, hey, we have to start, we'd have some time to prepare. There was a time when we looked through the old plans up at Civil Defense. There were plans to move the population of Oahu to Maui, to Kauai, and to Big Island, believe it or not. Now, can we do that now because of a population double? No, we do not have the capacity right now to do anything like that. There was a comprehensive fallout shelter program. There were designated fallout shelters, with that round symbol with the nuclear above. We have not been able to sustain that after the Cold War because once the threat passed, the funding stopped, and we did not maintain or sustain those shelters, designated shelters since then. We have buildings that can serve as shelters, but there are no designated shelters anymore. And in those shelters were prepositioned supplies, medical kits, even food and water, but that has not been maintained since. And in the Cold War, we were looking at megaton weapons. Russia and the United States, megaton weapons are warheads at 1 million tons or more. And we're looking at multiple reentry vehicles, multiple warheads in a single missile. Okay, that's what we had in the Cold War. On the right side is what we have right now. One rogue nation. We have no federal funding for fallout shelters and that type of evacuations activities. The warning is less than 20 minutes, and I'll go over that in more detail later on. We have no relocation plans at this time. There are no designated fallout shelters, no supplies caches inside the fallout shelters. But we're talking about single kiloton range devices. These are 1,000-ton warheads, single warheads, not multiple warheads. Okay, so that's the comparison of the Cold War and now. Okay, next slide. These are our planning assumptions. So when we plan, put together the plan as far as the response after impact and also the planning before impact, these are the assumptions that we have to make. We have to make assumptions, and these are the planning assumptions that we're making right now. Number one, North Korea, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, is developing missile technology and a nuclear payload that can target Hawaii. The launch would occur likely without prior warning. U.S. Pacific Command will detect the launch, however, may not be able to destroy a missile launched at Hawaii with absolute certainty. Now, number four is critical. It's based on the targets, the targeting. North Korea's military, if they're like the U.S. military, there's a targeting committee, believe it or not, that where they take all of the inventory of weapons and assign targets to these weapons. We're assuming that that targeting committee in North Korea would pick Honolulu as a primary target. However, it may impact on a neighbor island because we cannot discount that because he might miss. Okay, but we are looking at Honolulu, Paycom, Hickam, Pearl Harbor area as a primary target. There is no relocation of residents and visitors planned or will be attempted because of the short time frame of launch to impact. Now, the missile payload, when we first started this, we used a 15 kiloton weapon as the planning assumption, and this is the same as Hiroshima because that was a test level that Kim Jong-un was at. On September 3rd, his last nuclear test, he detonated something well in excess of about 100 kilotons. So that was a monumental shift in his capacity. So what we're doing now is we've adjusted our planning assumptions to come up with a 150,000 ton weapon, 150 kilotons, detonated at 1,000 feet above ground level. Okay. And number 7 is that we started this a few months ahead of other people, and now other people, being states, organizations, have come to us and asked us for what we're doing. So right now we're sharing information that we've accumulated over the past few months. The scientists are involved. Our primary scientist right now is the Atomic Energy Commission, Lawrence Livermore Laboratories, and what we call DTRA, Defense Threat Reduction Agencies. These are our federal agencies that are supporting us as far as what our research and science goes. And the corollary is, for tsunamis, we use Pacific Tsunami Warning Center. For lava, we use Hawaiian Volcano Observatories. For hurricanes and tropical storms, we use the Central Pacific Hurricane Center. So now for this event, these are the scientists that we are now using. So that's what we're based on. Next slide. Just a sample. This is the type of storage, the tunnels that are in it. This is what they look like today. So all of the supplies are all outmoded, and the tunnels are not capable of sustaining people right now. So that's where we are now, and that's why we're looking at shelter in place. And I'll go over in more detail for that. Next slide. Now this is the missile, anti-ballistic missile. General Logan had a chance to go to Alaska to take a look at this, the Alaska Interceptor Base. But if you see here, again, this is the launch. And this is a bit technical because it goes up, and it's this point in time we talked about decoy warheads. We're not sure whether he has that capability at this time. But upon launch, it's detected by satellites, ground-based radar. We got ships in the Sea of Japan. We got radar units in Japan that can detect this. Now, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but if you live in Honolulu by Pearl Harbor, you're going to see this thing. It's a golf ball. It goes back and forth between us and Alaska. It's a key part of the tracking system for an anti-ballistic missile system. Again, it goes up, comes up to mid-course. The interceptor is launched from either Vandenberg Air Force Base or Alaska. It's a kinetic warhead, does not have any explosive, but it hits it's like a bullet hitting a bullet, and it destroys the weapon just before it comes back into the atmosphere. Okay, that's the ABM system. And one thing I didn't say about Kim Jong-un when I compared the two, Kim Jong-un does not have a demonstrated anti-ballistic missile himself. So he has no defense against any kind of retaliatory action. Okay, next slide, please. Now, this is the blunt slide. This is what would happen if a 150 kiloton device hit Honolulu, the Pearl Harbor Hickam area. The blast and shock is the first thing. The thermal radiation, the heat. The radiation and fallout. The radiation is distinguished from fallout in this case because it's the immediate radiation burst when the weapon explodes. And then we have the electromagnetic pulse, which is something that was demonstrated in previous tests, where the initial burst will severely damage existing electrical grids, electronic equipment, and communication devices. Okay. On the right side is the consequences. Again, a 150 kiloton nuclear weapon at 1,000 feet. 50,000 to 120,000 trauma and burn casualties, with about 18,000 fatalities. There'll be about 15 to 30% of the survivors within that area exposed to initial radiation or fallout, and they will experience acute radiation syndrome in the affected area. So this is not statewide, this is in the impacted area. Damage to critical infrastructure, Daniel K. International Airport, Hickam, Honolulu Harbor, Pearl Harbor severely damaged or out of action. Widespread structural fires and building collapses. Damage to hospitals and government buildings. Loss of critical emergency services, fire, police, and EMS, and their communications. severe damage to roads and other critical infrastructure, loss of electrical and water utilities, loss of land, mobile radio, broadcast radio, television, cellular phone, internet services related to the electromagnetic pulse. Okay, this is where it's at as far as we understand based on the assumption of that size weapon. We're not holding anything back from anybody. This is what the models show at this point in time. Okay? Sometimes the feds or the federal government asks me, what can they do to help us? And my answer to them is, don't let this happen. Don't let this happen. Okay? Next slide. Okay, so that is about the current state right now. So let me go quickly into what we are doing. Okay, next slide. Okay, phase one is where we are now. Some of you might not be able to see the beginning part again, but it's really three parts. One is learning. We spent the last 4 or 5 months learning, talking to DITRA, talking to the civil support team that the National Guard has here about radiological effects, working with the Atomic Energy Commission, working with Lawrence Livermore Labs. And there's very interesting point is that there's one county on the West Coast, Ventura County, California. Now they're getting pummeled by that wildfires right now, but I tell you what, Ventura County was way ahead of anybody with respect to getting ready for this. And we capitalized on a lot of their material. But again, that was what we were doing for the last few months, is learning about this. The second part is the notification. I'll go more into the notification on the active duty military to us and to the counties on another slide. But that was a coordination with U.S. Pacific Command so that they would know how they would notify us, how long they would take to characterize the launch, to identify where it was heading, whether we were in danger, how they would notify us, and how we would get the word out to the counties. That was that part of that. And the third part of that, again, is the public guidance. We'll go over some of the guidance that you have. Some of it is on your table right now. But it was putting together that guidance and getting, this is about the 27th public forum we've done. We've gone to the counties, done training for the county EM personnel to pass it out. Talmadge has done presentations within the county. And again, that's what we've been doing over and over and over. And getting the people ready for the siren test, which happened December 1st. Okay. How many of you all heard the sirens? How many of you could tell the difference between the steady tone and the wailing tone? Okay. There are gaps. There are gaps in this that we have to work out. I know Talmadge has shared with me many times about the siren gaps we have here, but keep in mind that the sirens that were here originally were tsunami sirens along the coast, not many internal, so we have to work that. The other point was that we had to verify that we could trigger the sirens with one push of the button at the state level. So that, plus the wailing tone that went out, were successful. We were able to trigger the sirens with one button at the state level, and the wailing tone was available to get out. So now we have to fix the gaps, and that's what we're working on. I'll go over that in more detail. Now, phases 2 and 3 are post-impacts. The bottom line on this is that, first responders here are familiar with this, Daryl and some of the other folks that are here. Once impact happens, the bottom line is that we have to figure out where it hit, what the yield was, what the damage of the blast area was, what the moderate hazard zones are, what the light hazard zones are, so we can figure out who can go in, who can evacuate, what people we can extract and save, and what people we cannot. And then we have to determine where the fallout plume is, where it's going to go, so that we can plan for that, evacuate people out of the plume area, or advise them to shelter in place. Now this is unique because we're talking radiation, we're talking EMP, and these are the type of groups that we have to put together to figure it out. Public information and education again, emergency medical care, fatality management, radiological monitoring, decontamination, EMP, initial recovery, restoration of services, and critical infrastructure restoration. That's 72 hours out, and then we go beyond 72 hours, how we can go long term. Okay? So working groups have to be put together to put this all in place. And the whole idea of this is that if it happens, the county can't handle it. The state can't handle it by ourselves. So the federal agencies have to come in, but we have to choreograph the arrival of federal agencies so we make sure that the right agencies come at the right time. We have the right place to put them so that they can stage and support the affected county and make sure that it's choreographed so people don't get in the way of each other as everybody wants to help. We have to get ahead of it, make sure we get that sequence ahead of time, and make sure we get the relationships developed with these agencies. And that's what we're working on post-impact. Next slide, please. Again, launch to impact is only 20 minutes. So the time the missile launches from North Korea to the time it impacts in Hawaii, it takes 20 minutes. On the left side is PACOM. This is at Camp Smith. Once the missile is launched, this is what PACOM is doing. Detection. They detected the launch. They're launching the anti-ballistic missile system to engage the missiles, and they're doing the notifications. And what happens in that 5 minutes is PACOM participates in what is called a missile event conference. In the conference is PACOM, NORAD, North American Air Defense in Colorado, and DHS, Department of Homeland Security, is also participating in that teleconference. Within 5 minutes, they have to determine whether the missile is a danger to us, Guam, continental United States, or whatever. Once they make the determination that it's a danger to Hawaii, they will call us. We have a secure line from us to PACOM. This is the state warning point, which is a 24/7 emergency operating center in Diamond Head Crater. They will call us. Now the other point is DHS is also in that same event conference, and through NAWAS, the National Alert Warning Service, FEMA, DHS will also call us. So we get it two ways. The first call we get is when we push the siren button for the wailing tone, and we also initiate two other methods of notification. The other two methods of notification is emergency alert system and WEA for wireless emergency alert. And I'll go over that in another slide. But again, this is the bottom line for the public. Get inside, and stay tuned. Now it's funny, I cared about this in some time when I said, after all of this, is this all you guys have? But within that 20-minute or that 15-minute less time frame, this is all you can do. And you have to have this in your head ahead of time, you, your family, your loved ones, so that it's in your head and you know what to do versus, okay, now I'm going to try to do this. Okay? The reason I stop on this is that when I think about myself, okay, get inside. If I'm at Bruckheimer, I'm pretty good. I'm in a tunnel. If I'm driving to work, where would I go? What building would I stop by? If I'm at home, where would I go? Same thing, send up my house. And then what about your family? Where does your wife go? If she's at home, where does she go? If she's driving to work, where does she go? If she's downtown, where does she go? Same thing with your kids. Your kids are probably, my grandkids are probably in a school. The school has shelter-in-place procedures, and they're taking an active look at what we're doing right now, because I've met with some of the school principals already. But again, you have to have that plan ahead of time. Don't try to think of it when the sirens go off. It's too late. Okay, next slide. Now this is what we experienced on December 1st. The steady tone attention alert is what we always did before, the first workday of the month. Again, what that says to people is to turn on your radio, turn on your television, find out what's going on. And normally if it's for a tsunami or a hurricane, you've already had a few hours of notification on your television already. So that tells you it's time, it's close. For the wailing tone or the attack warning tone, it tells you take shelter immediately. If you have time as you're going to the shelter, you want to turn on your phone and all that stuff, do it, but take shelter immediately. Okay? Get inside, stay tuned. Next slide. Now this just covers the monthly test. Like I said, 11:45, the first workday of every month. We start with the steady tone. It's accompanied by the description, and I'll go over that. And then you get into the attack warning tone. And then the hazmat siren is something that's only for Kalaeloa and Barbers Point in Honolulu because of the chemical plants that are in Kalaeloa, Barbers Point. Okay, next slide. Now, these are the other two important systems of notification. The first, EAS, Emergency Alert System, that's the crawlers on your television, interrupted broadcasts on your radio, and that tells you about what's happening to take shelter. The bottom one is the wireless emergency alert system on your smartphone apps. You know, when you have National Weather Service alerts or flood warnings, your phone will buzz and a message will come on. That's the other notification. These two will be the primary methods of notification. How many of you don't have a smartphone? That's why this is the primary method of notification. Okay, and this will go statewide. In the California fires a few months ago, there was issues because some people got the notification about the fires and some didn't, because a lot of this was based on zip codes. For this event, it'll be statewide. Okay, next slide, please. And this is the pre-scripted message. The U.S. Pacific Command has detected a missile threat to Hawaii. A missile may impact on land or sea within minutes. This is not a drill. If you are indoors, stay indoors. If you're outdoors, seek immediate shelter in a building. Remain indoors, well away from windows. If you're driving, pull safely to the side of the road. Seek shelter in a building or lay flat on the ground. Take cover. And we will announce when the threat has ended. Okay, next slide. Now for the County of Hawaii, if you go on the Talmadge's website, this is how you sign up for the County of Hawaii's notification system. Talmadge, if you want to say anything?
Yes, if you go onto www.hawaii County/civil defense, and on that front page, you'll access the notifications. So I urge you to sign up for that, as well as the police Nixle. So two different notifications. You know, you guys are all successful people, and with that comes information. So you can get police and you get civil defense messages both off our site, and then come up to this page and just sign up.
Yeah, this will again avail you to the messaging in this event. Next slide, please. This is again what we're doing. We're working on this nuclear preparedness guide. This is the state level. The public outreach forums, and the bottom is a template that you all have in your tables. Take a look at that. It kind of describes what get inside, stay tuned means, gives you what the actions are, specific actions are, and also the rationale for it. Next slide. Okay, what you should do. This is basic. You just stay updated on what's going on in North Korea. You have open source information. Just keep aware of what's going on. There's some interesting op-eds done by some Far East experts, and one of them is Ralph Koss from CSIS, and he's postulating that maybe Kim Jong-un has come to the point where his testing is complete, and now he's ready for some kind of negotiation. But again, that's all up in there. But that was a very interesting, more positive outlook for the future. But we shall see. Learn about nuclear events. The FEMA website, ready.gov. There's a whole section on nuclear events. Ready.hawaii.gov is HIEMA's website. Take a look at that. Hawaii County with the Blackboard Connect message that Talma just mentioned. And bottom line, get inside, stay tuned. The shelter-in-place idea is easy to say shelter in place, but the idea is you have to know where that shelter in place is ahead of time. Here, for example, whatever basement is here, parking garage is here, would be a good place. Okay? Again, multiple times during the day, driving to work. Again, get ahead of it. Have a plan. Get ahead of it. Know where your family is. Know where you're going, so that when you do your thing and shelter in place, you're not worried about your family because they've already have plans and you know where they are. The drill. This should all be automatic. The family emergency supply kits, the 14 days. I'll go into this more, how the 14 days relates to radiation and how long you should stay sheltered in place for radiation. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is the matrix that you have. Please take a look at it. It gives you details on what to do and why. But that's for your copies. It's also available on our website, and it is updated constantly as we learn more and more about the science of how this works. Okay, next slide. Now, this is an interesting slide that I'd like to share with you guys. Do you have copies of this, Alina, in the handout? No. Okay, we got to get this out. but it's on our website. But if you look at the scores, I think what you want to do is get something like about 40, just about here. And these give you the points. Single family, 2-story, 3-story, 5-story. And these are the scoring points that you get for protection against radiation. Radiation fallout will go on the flat areas. Some will go along the roofs. Flat areas up here, flat area here, and on the ground. So the farther you get away from the radiation or the fallout, the safer you will be. Now, you might not get the score, but anything that you can put between yourself and the radiation and fallout will provide protection. Okay, so again, this is just as a guide of what kind of shelter to look at. Okay, next slide. Now this is something else. I've seen queries about radiation is going to last for hundreds and hundreds of years. This is what happens to fallout. The blast occurs here. The radioactivity on the fallout is high, but it falls very rapidly. We're talking about 48 hours here, right at the end. So after about a 48-hour period, even at 14 hours, you can see it decay very rapidly, but fallout will decay rapidly. And that's why the guidance to the schools and shelter in place right now is 48 hours shelter in place. After the 48 hours, we can take a look at evacuating people out of the area. The relation to the 14 days is that when we evacuate people from the fallout area, the harbor is still out of whack. Airports are still out of whack. You still need the 14 days to take care of yourselves after the evacuations. Okay, next slide. These are the types of radios, AM, FM, battery powered. Next slide. And this is what we've been passing to the schools. Again, get inside, shelter in place. Each school facility is different. Some are older with wooden structures. But again, that's what you have. Again, shelter in place to the best area you can, center of the building. Stay inside, again, until advised to leave by emergency management, 48 hours. And the advice to parents, again, is shelter in place. Don't try to come to the schools to pick up the kids. I've been told that's probably impossible, but again, that's the guidance because otherwise you're endangering both yourselves and your children. And stay tuned. Some of the schools have put together these go bags. A bag, 2 bottles of water, chips, snacks, and one school even put together a package where you put your parents' picture in there with a message to the kids, just to sustain them over the 48 hours. It's beautiful when the community gets together, comes up with great ideas. Next slide. This might be kind of sassy and sarcastic, but again, participate in your own rescue. Have a plan for your family and yourself. Participate in CERT. How many people are participating in CERT here? Community Emergency Response Teams. Now, you guys got a strong team here. I know during the lava flow, the CERT guys were going to all of the community members in Pahoa about the lava, informing them what was going on. So that's critical for community. Self-sufficient for 14 days, know what to do and when to do it, and keep the threat of North Korea in the right perspective. Very unlikely, but we have to know what to expect and what to do. That's it. Next slide. I'm sorry, that was pretty long, but again, I just want to thank you for the we're going to open to questions as long as you want. We'll be here as long as you want. But I would ask that there's surveys. If you could fill out the surveys, because we need input on what we're doing and how we can better effect this. But please take a few minutes and fill out those surveys. Really appreciate it.
Why would we get out of our car and get underneath it rather than staying in our car with the windows closed?
I tell you what, if you look in the guidance from the Cold War time, get out of your car because it turns into a microwave oven. Okay? But talking to Lawrence Livermore Labs, this was about a week and a half ago, it doesn't, if you stay in your car, you may be protected from the blast. You get out of your car, you might be protected from the heat, but you're going to get hit by the car. Maybe your airbags will help you out this time, but again, it's a recommendation. Take a look at it, and you have to just make your own informed decision. Okay? My wife buys bottled water. Okay? I could never figure out why we're paying for water. Okay? But the point is, I would suggest in your hurricane stash during the season, keep some bottled water, but at the same time, get the containers, the empty containers, these jugs, and at the onset of hurricane season, as we're tracking the storm 140 degrees out, fill it up with water then. Don't buy the water. Get the containers. Okay? And what I would also kind of disappoints is when I see people that buy the water, they try to return it after the storm passes. That's disgusting to me because the stores have put this stuff out for us, and here we are trying to return the water. That's just my 2 bits. Just get the containers, fill it up with water at the onset.
Based on the current information that you folks have, the 150 kiloton, the detonation height, 1,000 feet.
Yeah.
Things like the general wind direction. Is it possible to develop a plume model that would actually show primary, secondary, tertiary impact zones, which would then sort of give us a general idea which areas would be more susceptible to impact aside from the primary targets that you had?
Lawrence Livermore and Ditcho can give us these models, but based on the assumptions that we've done so far, there are plume models done 1,000 AGL above ground level. But Hawaii, there's basically the trades that come from the northeast over the islands. Then there's the Kona ones where the Kona winds go from Big Island up toward the northwest. And then there's also at the high level altitudes is the jet stream, which goes from west to east. So that's the difficulty in making the models. But based on that, the models are done based on the most prevalent conditions during the year. And we have models for that right now. Okay, that's been generated. But again, we have to get an idea exactly where the blast is or the impact areas before we can really plot it out. But right now, looking at Big Island, this is just Miyagi talking. You guys are out of it as far as the fallout. If it sticks the same way, we're looking at over. We're looking at if it based on the assumption that it hits Oahu. Yeah, I think. Yeah.
You talk about the pre-planning and identifying a shelter-in-place area. I would just suggest that you'd also include letting somebody else in your neighborhood know where that is. So you may know where it is, but somebody else also knowing for recovery operations later on. That's one of the things I think that they have. When if everything comes down because of the blast, knowing where people went to shelter in place is important. The second, the question, and I apologize for the question in advance. When there's an attack, there's usually something else happening as well, some synchronized post-attack operation. And so can I assume that there's something that's being looked at in regards to the possibility of some type of terrorist action that might be also included as a part of wherever they're targeting?
Yeah, that's a contingency that we've looked at this probably separately as far as this contingency. We work with the Fusion Center and on some of the other federal agencies within the purview to find out if anything else is going on. Right now, that will be treated as a terrorist event or a terrorist potential. Now, your point about the community letting people know where you are, that's critical. And that's why the CERT or the community, when the community gets together and helps each other out, that's where it's at. Especially Kapuna, people that are wheelchair bound or need medical requirements. If the community knows that, they can take care of each other. And I saw that in Pahoa. I mean, Big Island is a good example of how to do this. Nana Valley Estate, same thing. Okay? That's a good question. What happens is that if the weapon detonates within the ocean, it would be like a locally generated tsunami, offshore earthquake. Yeah, we're not talking about a Pacific-wide tsunami, but it would be like a locally generated tsunami. Yes, it could. Yes,
Yes.
please.
Is the state doing anything about stockpiling supplies, and especially for institutions such as schools? You mentioned that it's going to be hard to keep the kids in school away from their parents for the 48 hours. So will there be supplies stockpiled in schools and hospitals and nursing homes and places that can't get out?
So right now, there are no state plans to provide any stockpiles, but we need to work with the hospitals, the schools, and so on how they do this, how they can last for that 48 hours. Some of the schools, the schools are not all, they're individual facilities. So talking to the principals, we're talking about maybe stockpiling water, some caches of food within the school, and then having the kids bring in these go bags. And it's really interesting because the parents, some of the parents we're talking to are coming up with these ideas of how to take care of kids within school. And they combine all of their stuff together and last the 48 hours. But again, it's by individual school, individual facility. The state does not have any plans right now to provide supplies and stockpiles in these organizations.
Two questions. One, can you talk about aircraft in the air, in proximity in the airspace? I just thought about what happens if you're in the blast radius or whatever. And then second, this information in this briefing, excellent information, awesome. So is this put out through DOE and across the board, public, private, charter, every school has this information?
We want to get this out to all of the schools, all of the organizations. Like I said, we've done about 27 or so of these out, but we need to get to the counties. I've met with the CAS, the Complex Area Superintendents on Kauai, Honolulu, and we're going to meet over here also, but to talk to the principals of these same things. But again, each facility has to work it to themselves. Now, the stuff about the airplanes, if it detonates and there's an airplane right in the blast area, there's not much we can do. What General Logan said was that if the launch is detected toward us, NORAD, which is a North American Air Defense, will notify FAA, and FAA will indicate that the plane should just get out of the area, some kind of warning at least. Okay, please.
I'm Deb Lewis, Colonel retired. I worked with the Corps of Engineers, and I also was working J-34 anti-terrorism during 9/11. So with that backdrop, I would like to suggest a suggestion and then ask you some of your initiatives compared to that. This is an excellent opportunity, as bad as the situation is, it's an excellent opportunity to review all our plans, there are many things, as you saw, were very similar to any other event that we might have. When I was in Seattle, for example, we had 44 presidential disaster declarations in a row. Because why? We could have all of these things in a 4-state area, and this particular island of all of them can have all of them at the same time. So that's why our robustness with our emergency management. But the point is that understanding, one, what's common with the other plans that we have, so that we continue to do things that are going to keep us safe, even such as 14 days or more supply. We see trends around the world, but somehow we think, oh, that's not going to happen to us. Yes, it can. And yes, it could in all different scenarios. And a lot of things that we found out with the engineering side of disasters is that understanding the differences, like why, it was a great question, frequently asked questions need to be put out there, as mundane as they may seem, when you see a guidance to have something to say why that makes sense. Because a lot of times the philosophy and the assumptions may not be shared. And so we need to make sure that that's certainly clear and easy to access. Because there happens in an event a lot of misinformation. And the third piece is, you've already done a beautiful job. I really liked how you laid out the information that you had before the event, during the event, after the event, because we will try to get back to normalize as soon as possible. Again, those kind of resources, it's going to be the communities helping each other. And what we face with mass notification is, how do you get the information quickly, which you now have? We didn't have smartphones back then, you know, not doing what we do today, but how do you get the information to the people who need it and help them make decisions that are going to keep them safer, not less safe? And the idea is sometimes wanting to go to your child may be the worst thing that you can do. And so those kind of nuances, it sounds like you're really getting to understand what that means. And the more you can put it in a digestible packet. We had a job aid for anti-terrorism, terrorist response for a job aid. And that's one of the best ways to package the information in a simple, handy-dandy tool to get it. We are in overload. Most of us here are doing 5 million jobs and roles and stresses facing. But the easier that we can make it to help us do the right thing and be a support as opposed to what can happen when even a hint of something happens, all the phone lines get overloaded, all the emails get overloaded, and whatever we can do, I know you're thinking about it because you think about it every day with our normal disasters that we face, but really appreciate if there's any other comments that you have along those lines, I'd really like to hear it.
Well, I think your comment about, we want to put this like it's another disaster, it's another emergency, it's another threat. So all of the individual resilience, family resilience that you put together also affects this. And the point it's very important that for all disasters, you have to know what to expect and what to do ahead of time. If you can at least do that, then you'll be pretty much ready for any disaster. And that's what the focus is right now. It's public outreach, making sure everybody, as much as we can, understands what will happen, what you should do if this ever happens. But again, we want to make sure that we understand, based on what I said before, why this is very, very unlikely. To put that into perspective, we can't ignore it. It is unlikely, however, okay? And that is why. But keep track of the news, see what's going on in North Korea. You know, his nuclear testing facility collapsed. I don't know if you guys heard that. But the mountain that he was exploding his 6 weapons just collapsed, took some casualties. But then, I'm not sure what that does to his nuclear test capability anymore. Okay? And the other thing was that the United States and Russia took many tests before they could have their warhead survive re-entry, that they could ensure that their weapon was small enough to go the nuclear weapon could go on a missile. On and on and on and on. He does not have that opportunity. So just keep that in perspective. Okay?
Based on your assumptions of the size of the weapon and location in Honolulu, do you have any projections on the disruption to cellular technology and radio and what the range would be of that disruption?
So if the burst is line of sight to Big Island, depending on the size of the burst, it would affect the Big Island also. The only weapon that is an example of this was something called Starfish. This was years and years ago. It was like a 2.4 megaton weapon, detonated about 400 miles above Johnston Island. It affected Honolulu. But the size of the weapon, we're not talking about that size weapon and that high of an altitude. And we don't know whether he can detonate it at that altitude. So it's uncertainties, but again, I learned this term when I first started. It is what it is. And that's where I am right now as far as the research. It could affect it. Did I answer it? Anybody else, please?
We have a lava tube on our property, which my father always told us, that's where you go. And so is that true? Is that where you go?
You'd have to assess the strength of the tube, how thick it is. That, I think, would be, if you're looking for a shelter in 15 minutes, and that's
That's in the backyard, yeah.
Unless your house is hollow tile, concrete, CMU,
Oh, my house is hollow tile, okay.
Okay. But keep the lava tube as an option.
Yeah,
Okay?
there you go.
Coming from the visitor industry, I'm wondering who's stockpiling for our visitors should this happen, and they're all stuck here.
When we first started this, we met with the Hawaii Visitor Agency, HTA, and we're working with them as far as taking care of the visitor industries because they're very important. The stockpiling for the hotel is something that is a problem right now for hurricanes. As far as using the hotels as a shelter, they have only about 2-3 days supply of stuff, and then their employees will have to be taken care of also, not just the visitors. But there is a focus to evacuate the visitors. This is for a hurricane or tsunami type event. But again, this is something that we're working with the tourism agency on. The siren test, this is another concern about the tourist agency, is the languages, the alerts, all the notifications that we have. We have to consider the foreign language, Japanese, Korean. We also have to concern ourselves with the hearing impaired. So these are gaps that have come up that we have to start working on. But NHK, Yomi Uri, the Korean broadcasting, they were all over our EOC during the test. And they've committed to assist us in the translation of these documents that are here and to get it out to their people. So that's how we're working. There's a big gap there and we need to work on it. Okay. I know I didn't answer your question, but I'm acknowledging that there is a gap that we have to work on. Please, anybody else?
What role will the neighbor island hospitals play with the 120,000 casualties?
Very good. The question was, what role will the neighbor island medical care facilities participate? Again, if something happens in Honolulu, and we do the plumes, the counties, Big Island is okay, Maui is okay, for example, Kauai is okay, then we'll be looking for the counties to support emergency operations within Honolulu. Okay? We're also bringing in the federal agencies. So as far as potential evacuation of casualties to the neighbor islands is a possibility. A possibility of staging federal medical care facilities on the outer islands or the neighbor islands is a possibility. But again, this is the stuff that we have to work through based on the assumptions that we've done. But as far as you don't have the capacity to handle that many casualties. And we'd have to be looking at evacuation somehow. Or looking at other parts of Oahu that could, on the other side of the Ko'olaus, for example, that could support some of this. Federal agencies coming in. It's a massive problem. I know I didn't answer your question, but that's what we need to look at. Anybody else, please? This is where I say thanks a lot for listening, and have a nice day.
I want to thank General Logan and Vern. Every time I tell him General, I tell me, no, it's Vern. So thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it. And thank all of you for coming today and getting updated with the information. Appreciate it. These gentlemen will be here just a few minutes. So if you want to ask questions, they'll be available. So thank you very much, everyone.